Yo, what is going on? We are back with another episode of the Unsilent Church Podcast. We are in the building and we're talking about something very, very important right now. It's going crazy right now in the airwaves. A lot of people are talking about it. Politicians talking about it. Preachers talking about it. Parents talking about it.
They're all talking about it.
Those peas.
Are parents really talking about it?
The parents in the community, they talking about this, man. And so, V, go ahead and let us know what we're talking about today, man.
Yeah, we call it the Unsilent Church, so we're going to go right in on this.
Let's go right in.
So, as many of you know, there's been a lot of different changes with the current administration. One of the biggest ones that has hit is Trump's signing of an executive order to roll back all DEI programs in the government. And his efforts to do that have sort of led to a mass rolling back of DEI programs in corporations, institutions, schools, really everywhere. And I think really the topic that we want to talk about today is why this is happening, how we feel about that. We're obviously doing this through the lens of as Christians. Is there ways in which we would say, yeah, there's things that need to be addressed, and this is why DEI is being treated this way, or maybe there's things that are being done that actually are wrong and that are harming people because of how aggressively DEI is being pursued and attacked right now currently. So let me sort of open it up that way, and then I can give a little bit of history of what DEI is, how it came about. Want me to do that now?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
All right, good. Let me set this up. So DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and really DEI. There's always been sort of, you might say, DEI programs, sort of efforts to more directly and intentionally, systematically include minority groups and others who weren't normally included in jobs, higher leadership, contracts, etc.
And again, this was to correct. The hope was to correct a long-standing history of
years.
legalized, legislated discrimination against minority groups, especially black people.
Exactly.
Stemming from, slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, all of that, all things that were legal under the United States government, which people I think have to recognize, because often in conversations that even I have, people talk about, well, it's a legal proceeding, so it's fine. And I'm like, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's just.
Right. And
I think sometimes, especially in seasons like this, we forget that.
So really, since the 1960s, we see these type of efforts in different programs, et cetera. But DEI probably really came more to the public consciousness in the wake of George Floyd. And so after his murder, there was huge outcry and huge sort of public pressure to see institutions, companies more directly address racial justice. And so DEI programs start sprouting up everywhere. Centers, initiatives. In 2020, this is a New York Times article, estimates the DEI market was about $3.4 billion.
It's funny. They called it the DEI market. It tells you something that happened. Like,
yeah,
I don't know if we won't go there right now, but the fact that they called it the DEI market means that something about DEI fundamentally changed. Like, there's always the intent of a thing, but then when you talk about like what happened later, I think, and some of that might be something that we have to honestly deal with and say,
that's right.
DEI started with an intention to solve a real problem, right? Just like many things start, but then over time, I think people realize how much money there is to be made. And then it starts to corrupt something that was intended to be good. And that corruption then opens the door for a good thing to then be.
So initially, DEI programs involved diversity workshops, helping facilitate conversation among minority groups, efforts to close recruitment gaps, to retain minority employees, bring more knowledge, awareness, interconnection within employees, hiring more leaders, et cetera, et cetera. But, and I think this is where we sort of we got to sort of recognize, you really alluded to it well. If you even see the premise of it, companies responded because of public pressure in the wake of George Floyd. It wasn't a sense of like, we've had this internal reckoning and realize like something's changed. They began to realize this is a way for our company to be publicly accepted, lauded, approved of. And so I think that led to programs being implemented that in some degree we just got to put something out there, right? And I think this is where we need to be honest. There's not been a ton of studies done in the effectiveness of DI programs. However, when you begin to see the kind of programs that came out there, I mean, some of them were very good, but others weren't nearly as effective as we might think. That really sort of devolved into basically, if you're white, you're bad, and this whole workshop is about how bad you are, right? And if you think about this and what that does, and this is a tale as old as time. When you sort of, here's one group that's been oppressed, and now we're going to sort of take the oppression from them. But instead of saying, okay, we shouldn't oppress anyone, we're going to sort of put it on this other group. And I'm sort of using oppressed. I mean, white people aren't being oppressed the way black people were by any means. But when you sort of create programs, et cetera, that say, essentially, you guys are the worst, and you have no opinions. We won't build any sense of solidarity with you. We shouldn't be surprised there are lawsuits, there was pushback. There's all sorts of things that begin to happen, right? And again, there is legitimate things that are being addressed in all this, but I think it's interesting to sort of note that some of the reasons why I think there has been this huge aggressive pushback against DEI is because of the many ways in which it was poorly implemented, poorly carried out, and the effects it had among people who engaged in the programs.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's funny that, and again, people talk about all the time how, so there's a guy, John Hope Bryant, who's, I mean, he's on a podcast he's on Cam Newton's podcast.
He's been on Cam Newton's joint. I think
he's been everywhere.
Club too,
like he's everywhere. He runs an organization called the Hope Foundation. He, I think, has made a ton in real estate. And so they're having a conversation about, DEI and the good parts of it. So Cam's asking them like, hey, what about the people who, are being affected by this and jobs and opportunities that are going away because of this sort of action, and sometimes you could sort of take his response as a bit crass or insensitive. Because again, he's on record. You can go on his Instagram. I don't care about DEI. I care about DIY. I want to teach you how to do it yourself. Do it yourself. Oh. Because one thing is that when money is that easy to get, then you find people who are like, oh, this is an easy way for me to make money, and then take that, and then instead of trying to build a culture of solidarity, you instead flip and turn into and say, oh, I've got power to then enact my own form of. You remember Gladiator 2? And so you remember Denzel's character where he's like, again, he comes out of like oppression and the ashes of injustice. Like there's a quote that I got listening, from a movie that talks about, a people born from the ashes of injustice, you would think would limit its practice of injustice. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Yeah. People of Israel, same thing, came out of slavery, but as soon as they come into power, they start doing the very same things that were happening to them. And sometimes you see it in cases like this where it's like, now we've got power, we've got influence, we've got money. And instead of saying, let us set things right, let's do things differently. Let's make crooked paths straight. Like what you did should not have been done. And we're going to do it the right way. They instead reverse it and say, we're going to do the exact same thing you did to us, to you, right? We're going to pay evil for evil. We're going to do eye for an eye. And that's become a problem. And then when you do it under the banner of programs that are supposed to be for, diversity, equity, inclusion, all when you think about them itself are good things. They're the things that actually make our country better.
Some people would argue differently against that, but
we'll get there. But when you do it under that banner, that entire thing, you take the entire thing down because now it looks like it's been stained. And because all the money that's being poured into it and the lack of results that you can see from it, you're not seeing the projects or the scholarships or some of the opportunities. You are in some cases, but if there's overwhelming evidence that there's not that, then it's going to be an easy target, especially when, especially if the situation is already biased in the other direction, right? So if it's already biased against diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then here's a program that's getting all this money, when they start doing budget cuts, that's going to be the first thing that they go like, oh, we didn't want that anyways, right? You just made it easier for them to take away something that was going to give us a better opportunity to create equality and equity.
I regularly allude to the civil rights movement and lessons to learn from there. Because arguably, it's true, the civil rights movement was a successful effort to DEI, right? Here's segregation, and we need to find ways to eliminate this segregation, eliminate voter inequality, all that kind of stuff, right? I always like to point out the success of the civil rights movement wasn't the success solely of black people by themselves doing everything possible and saying, no, white people, we don't need you, we don't want to talk to you, you can't be included in this. I think the push of the civil rights movement and what the leaders successfully were able to do was to say, we need to build solidarity. We need white people to say, this is good for you as well. We need white allies.
This is good for everybody.
We need to sort of create a sense in which segregation, the reason segregation is bad is not just because it's bad for black people. It's bad for America. It's bad for who we are as a people. The reason why you see the black leaders showing and really letting people know, look at these bombings. Look what they're doing to families. Look at how it's killing kids. I mean, this goes back to even to slavery. Look what the effect it is on families and others when you separate families together through slavery. All those things are building the sense of what we need to end up with is a sense of common community, of common humanity. That's what we're trying to do here. And so I think efforts, so DEI, and you're right, just on its terms, diversity, equity, inclusion. Who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want, and this is as Christians, our community is inherently diverse. The gospel is for all people. It's equitable in the sense of like all people can find salvation. It's inclusive in the sense of it's meant to include people from every tribe, race, and nation, right? From men and women, all these different people. So those things are good and should be promoted. How we do it becomes really important. And I think that's, I think what happened was a lot of companies just sort of threw money at this. And so let's just put something up there. And so you began to create conditions where things were being done that didn't actually lead to those communities of solidarity and unity.
And you don't really have a vision for diversity. You don't quite understand like what diversity,
and
like
there's weird
achieves.
things that happened too. Like, I mean, I was looking at this article, and so you began to have like this. If you remember this, the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, they issued an apology after this, but then one of the efforts they had was they put this graphic that said, here's what white culture is. It's rational thought, hard work, and emphasis on scientific method, right? Like that's white culture, like thinking logically, right? But I can almost see how we need to sort of show what white people do and what black people do. And as a way of elevating that, we're going to identify characteristics towards them. I mean, stuff like that is silly, but think about that writ large, right? Where you begin to create all these different sort of, really stereotypes of different groups, as opposed to saying, as opposed to looking at it historically, here's the differences, but then here's what we hold in common. Here's how we move forward together. Here's how we better understand one another. The best DI programs tend to focus on specific actions and things that can be done in a specific setting. So it's not sort of one size fits all. It's asking, okay, so Costco doesn't seem to have a lot of black employees. Why is that? Let's ask questions. Is there ways in which we're not understanding different things? As opposed to saying, well, culturally speaking, here's how all you white people view black people in Costco, and so we're going to make you go through this program.
The other sort of issue that happened is that that's a sad thing to hear happen. It becomes a black-white issue, and not realize that DEI, the largest beneficiary of it was white women, disabled, then veterans, and then I think there was one more group I'm forgetting about, and then it was black people. So it's like black people weren't even the ones benefiting from it the most, to think like it wasn't even just a black-white issue. Like diversity doesn't mean just diversity
black and white
ethnically. Yeah. There's gender situations, there's ability differences, right?
Yeah,
there's so many different, there are other things happening there. LGBTQ, that was the other. But there's so many other things that were happening in that again, like, I don't think you fail to realize that diversity creates better products. It innovates better. You get better ideas. You end up making more money. And I think when he starts doing this executive order and then you start seeing all these corporations roll all their programs back, it's because you start to realize that as much as all these for-profit companies talk about like the hard work and effort and ingenuity, so many of them depend on the multi-billion dollar contracts that they get from the federal government that comes from our taxes. And so as much as all this for-profit stuff
That's
talks about, it's
interesting.
like a lot of them are getting paid from government. Governments use iPhones. Government drives Teslas. Like there's a ton of money that goes into from the federal government, public money, goes to a lot of private institutions. A lot of people don't know that's where banks get their money from. Like that's what actually happens. And so when the government says, "Hey, we're rolling this back. Like we don't want this anymore, and you better do it too," whether you hear it publicly or not, the reason why so many companies jumped and were like, "Okay, we're taking it out. We're taking it out of our corporate documents. We're taking it all out," is because if they don't, all that money that they get from those government contracts
is gone.
So and affects stock prices, affects shareholder value, affects the value of that company.
So what I'm hearing you say is basically, essentially, these companies, these people, et cetera, that's in these decision-making positions, they don't necessarily really care about diversity per se. Is more so just about, this is going to affect the bottom line. This is going to affect the money.
Well, think about it.
Therefore, we're going to make decisions based upon that versus what they really, quote unquote, value. Or at least they're showing what they value by rolling it back, saying, well, if we're going to lose millions and whatever of dollars.
Not everyone. I mean, there's some who've Apple, Costco.
Exactly. So not everybody rolled it back. And you could tell that because they were consistent before George Floyd. It was like that after.
Got it.
Right?
Got you.
Oftentimes when such a...
Target is the one that...
I think Target rolled back, Walmart rolled back. A number of companies rolled back.
Matter of fact, Target, one of the pastors, I think it was Pastor Jamal Bryant in Atlanta. I think he said that everyone needs to go on a Target fast. Did you hear about that? The 40 days or so, like 40 days of the Target fast.
But again, when you think about like in the beginning where you see all this money being poured into DEI initiatives and DEI positions and DEI projects, like you say it, you're like, oh, that wasn't because there's a change of heart. Oh, my heart of stone towards diversity got changed into a heart of flesh, and now I feel like I need to make this change. It was, hey, here's opportunity. Let's create a position, create these projects, because then if we can be associated as a company, tied to closely with DEI, then that might boost bottom line.
And this happened after you said George Floyd.
Yeah, this is a money-driven. It was a money-driven effort.
Wow.
And so now when it's like, hey, well, a lot of that money comes from federal government. If you still want that money that contributes to your bottom line, you better remove those things because we're going to stop giving it to you. So again, look at the interaction between him and Maryland. Same idea. Him and Maine. Yeah, but same idea.
I think we're saying, there was large scale issues and problems with how DEI was implemented that need to be addressed. Mm-hmm. But now we need to say the way in which that's being done is, I think, is going to be ultimately harmful. So rather than sort of saying, hey, the difference between a scalpel versus a sledgehammer, right? So here's just the issues there. There's a problem to be dealt with. But this sort of sledgehammer approach was to say, let's just eliminate all of it because we can just assume people do naturally care about these issues. It's been solved in America. That's why we don't need any sort of intentional effort or thought process behind it. Sort of that's really the reasoning behind the rollback by the government and other things. I think we want to say, I think that's going to lead to harm on the other side, right? So on one end, it was implemented badly, but the solution isn't to just basically eliminate the concept entirely.
Right.
And I think that's what I think is a little bit distressing. And even some of I think you're already beginning to see some of the effects of that, in which the way people are talking about minority groups and others, the way they're sort of dismissing the concerns of different groups. I think this is early days, but I do think a couple of years from now we'll begin to see like, oh, wait a second, rolling all these things back has led to. It's not producing rolling these things back isn't going to produce solidarity. It's going to sort of continue to reinforce the divisions and the lack of understanding that we really need.
Yeah, it's almost like it's unfortunate that the rollback. One, a rollback isn't what you needed because again, that whole like 48 gives it a mule idea, like the case for reparations, all of that was still a legitimate thing where you go, hey, if DEI was one path towards that. It's like, even if, there was more money put there for reasons that weren't always pure. It's like, it still gave us an opportunity to create pathways and opportunities that weren't there before. that is progress. And so to take a sledgehammer to that and just be like, no, we're going to knock all those walls down. You go, oh yeah, that definitely feels like a slide back for sure. And I think, it's going to be tough to try to think like what the next 4 years, again, every day for 4 years. It's not 4 years when you think 1, 2, 3, 4. You're talking 1,200, 1,300 days of constant targeting of programs like these that were intended to create the kind of solidarity and equity that we needed in order to correct, again, hundreds of years of legalized, legislated, institutionalized discrimination.
Let me read this quote from an article interacting with this. He writes, a mature society endeavors to search for talent beyond what it might seem most intuitive to look and uses imagination and compassion in allocating avenues of success. So affirmative action, basically, when you take out identity politics and lowering standards or virtue signaling, sort of in its best form, is a model of good advancement. It's sort of helping people who might not normally see things or understand things. It's like, hey, your circles look like this. There's a reason why it looks like this. I'm not going to shame you or guilt you for this, but just say, hey, if you sort of broaden your circle and begin to realize there's really good talent to be found in these groups of people, and let me show you avenues to be able to identify that talent and realize they bring something unique that can help you.
Yeah, cast a wider net.
Exactly. That's really what it is. It's casting a wider net and leveling a playing field whereas a playing field needs to be leveled. Where someone who's, this includes, let's sort of think broadly. So the poor white kid living in a trailer park in West Virginia is facing issues and problems, right? Maybe more issues and problems than the black kid who's growing up in Buckhead, right? And so we want to recognize those people. But then there's unique and maybe even more problems for the black kid who's grown up in, say South Side somewhere, South Side Chicago. It's sort of giving an eye towards those things and building, it's a very biblical concept, compassion, right? Compassion, understanding, and the desire to show grace, to then lift people up and to let them use their God-givenness. Not to say, to give people what was not true to them, but to say they have unique talents and abilities, and we want to better identify them and give them space to use them for the glory of God in all the areas God has called them to. That's what we should all want. That's what the church should do. That's what we desire. And sort of this, I think what's sad is because it was done badly, we're sort of eliminating even sort of the instinct or the vision to continue to do those kind of things, or to be able to sort of help us be a community that's this way. And I think the reality is because of sin, we always need help in these areas.
Yeah.
We always need to be addressing these things. I've always been struck by, particularly in this area, people sort of act as if like, hey, there's a way in which we can solve prejudice and discrimination. I've been in a lot of countries in the world. It doesn't matter where you go. There's always ways in which one group finds a way to discriminate in another group, even if they look similar, right? Yep. So I was in Dominican Republic recently, and some of the historic racism between Dominicans and Haitians, they look alike, right? They're on the same island. And yet there's been ways in which they've discriminated against each other, right? Now, it's way easier to do so in our country because of the color of people's skin, but that has historically been always an issue. And so that's why we always need the gospel to help us address that and rectify those things. And we should never be sort of think like, wow, we're going to solve it, and so we don't need any efforts or intention to sort of begin to look at these things. These efforts and intentions will probably always be with us in some way and form, but here's why we do it. As you said, not to reverse things, right? I'm on top, no, you're on top, no, I'm on top, you're on top. It's exactly. Not that. It's, hey, this is sin. How do we come to a common place before the Lord?
Yeah, and do so in a way that actually is, again, that does affect the institution. I think sometimes we talk in, I think sometimes in our church conversations, and again, we've all been in those conversations where we talk about like, we just need to be praying more. It's like, yes, but we have Christians that are in these positions of power that write some of these laws. You should be writing the laws to create this kind of space that helps a country. The reason why you're in that position of power is to shape the way to try to get a country to lead with compassion instead of lead from economy. And I think a lot of times we're doing the latter instead of the former. And you find yourself being like, oh, well, which one are you actually serving? Like it often looks like you are serving money instead of God, and you got to choose one. And I think if we can get Christians who are in those places to start to write laws that lead with compassion and not economy, like compassion first. And I think when you lead with compassion, it's going to affect the economy. Like you're saying it before, like you need diversity. That it actually makes the country more money. It makes companies more money. And so if you lead with compassion, you're going to see that effect. But I think the language often is
and not just for the sake of money either.
Yeah, not just for the sake of it at all. Yeah. But that, again, you get the latter if you focus on the former. You lead with compassion, you'll get economy. Often when you lead with economy, you don't get the other.
That's good. That's good. I think it's a good way to land the plane, man. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure that we've contributed to the airways of DEI. And listen, for those that are listening, we want you to be able to give us your thoughts about the whole DEI conversation. Like, share, and comment. As we always say, love God, love people. We are out. Peace.